So you're looking for a new OLED monitor and you've got your eyes on the wide range of 27-inch 240Hz refresh rate models that are available. But which is the better buy between the widely recommended Asus ROG Swift PG27AQDM or the newcomer from KTC, their G27P6? Today we'll compare the features, performance and price to hopefully help you decide. Let's start with a comparison on the monitor's features. The KTC offers a few things that the Asus model doesn't, helping to make it a little bit more versatile than a general gamer's screen. There's a USB Type-C connection, which includes DisplayPort Alt mode and 65 watts of power delivery. So that might be really useful if you want to connect a laptop to the screen for simple single cable setup. There's also a KVM function, which seems to be featured on nearly every new monitor you'll see announced nowadays, and this will allow you to control two systems from a single keyboard and mouse. There's even some moderate 5-watt stereo speakers which aren't super powerful or anything, but do at least provide some sound support if you need. So this might be useful if you're going to connect an external device like a games console or a Blu-ray player for instance, and you don't have a separate speaker setup for those. None of these features are included on the Asus model, so if any of these are useful to you, the KTC will be a better choice. Both screens have the same functionality from the stand, with a full range of adjustments offered, but we did prefer the chunkier and sturdier looking design of the Asus stand ourselves, although the KTC is still nice and strong with a metal arm and feet providing a strong base, and that is despite its thinner profile and appearance. The KTC has a more modest and office type design in general, whereas the Asus includes the typical gamer aesthetic, although with a newer design compared with most of their current ROG monitor range. The design preference is very much going to come down to personal taste and requirements. If features like RGB lighting and logo projections are important to you, or you like that premium gaming design, then the Asus offers more in those areas than the KTC model. If on the other hand you prefer something a little bit more subtle and minimalist, then the KTC has got you covered. Both models have a fanless design thankfully, so they remain silent, and both manufacturers promote the addition of a custom heatsink that is supposed to help with heat dissipation and help reduce the risk of image retention and prolonged lifespan. When it comes to other OLED panel care features, we liked the added options to turn off things like the pixel shifter mode and also enable a logo dimming feature that the Asus model offered where the KTC didn't. Both models are built around the exact same LG Display W OLED panel, both also with the same matte anti-glare coating. So some aspects of the performance are going to be the same between the two. When it comes to gaming, the response times are near instant as expected from this technology, and combined with the high 240Hz refresh rate, provide excellent motion clarity equivalent to a 360Hz LCD monitor. Both models are identical in this area, and they both also have an identical input lag, measured at only 0.55 milliseconds signal processing delay, which was excellent. There's also nothing really to separate the two screens for console gaming, with both featuring HDMI 2.0 ports and supporting 1440p at 120Hz or 4K at 60Hz maximum. Neither can actually support 4K 120Hz content though, since the ports are not HDMI 2.1. Both screens also offer per pixel level dimming thanks to the OLED panel, which ensures excellent HDR performance with true blacks, a near infinite contrast ratio and the avoidance of all blooming and halos. These are some of the key reasons why OLED technology is so well suited to HDR content. Where things do differ though is their setup and configuration. So let's compare those areas a little bit further. While we're talking about HDR, let's take a look at that first. We'll compare the results in HDR when each screen has been set to its optimal settings, as close to a D65 colour temperature as we could achieve, which is the typical target for this content. The KTC has a more accurate overall setup in HDR after a minor tweak to move to the warm colour temp mode. The grayscale accuracy is better and the colour temp and grayscale are closer to D65 too. You can see this by comparing the middle section of the graphs shown here. If we look then at the right hand side graphs, the Asus is a little too dark near black, with the grey PQ curve of the monitor dropping below the yellow target line a little bit. This can lead to some crushed shadow detail. It does track the PQ curve nicely for lighter shades though. The KTC on the other hand has a better tracking of the PQ curve in darker shades, being perhaps slightly high but not crushing shadow details quite as much as on the Asus model. It does veer off from the target in lighter grey shades though, resulting in some loss of detail in lighter grey and bright scenes. Colour accuracy was much better on the KTC model with an average delta E of 1.0 if we ignore the primary RGB shades from the Rec 2020 colour space that we know can't be covered by the panel's colour gamut. The Asus screen on the other hand only achieved a moderate 3.3 delta E average based on the same criteria. Finally then, if we look at the peak brightness capability, we can see a bit of a difference here between the two models in our measurements. This translates into some visual brightness difference during actual usage as well. Neither screen quite reaches the 1000 nits peak brightness in the spec in these D65 colour temp modes, but the Asus does reach a bit higher overall with a peak of 924 nits reached for a 10% window size. However, it does tail off much more quickly than the KTC for larger window sizes, and so for anything above 25% APL, the Asus is then darker. The automatic brightness limiter, or ABL, is more aggressive on the Asus model. In real use, the screens look very similar when there are smaller bright highlights in otherwise darker content, but for overall brighter images with a larger APL, the KTC does look brighter and has a more impactful HDR performance. The overall setup and performance of the KTC for HDR usage is better than the Asus model. When it comes to more general usage, office applications and SDR content, then there's one key thing offered by the Asus screen that the KTC is lacking, and that's a uniform brightness mode. With this enabled on the Asus screen, the screen's brightness is kept consistent regardless of the content being shown or your window sizes, and then there's no need for the OLED ABL feature to be used. With uniform brightness enabled on the Asus, you can use the screen up to around 259 nits maximum, and this is great for avoiding annoying dimming and brightening of the images during any kind of office, photo or general uses. If you wanted a higher brightness potentially for dynamic content in SDR mode, like gaming or movies for instance, then turning uniform brightness mode off allows the screen to reach up to a higher 413 nits maximum, but ABL will be present for any setting above around 150 nits. The KTC screen, on the other hand, lacks any uniform brightness mode at all, and so ABL is present and evident at all settings, even for lower brightness levels. It can reach a little bit brighter, up to around 442 nits maximum, but the ABL will kick in for any larger APLs, resulting in noticeable dimming of the screen and fluctuations in brightness. This probably won't be as noticeable during dynamic content consumption, but it is annoying for office use and could be problematic for any colour critical or professional applications. We would definitely have liked to have seen a uniform brightness mode offered by KTC on their screen. The default setup out of the box of the two screens was good overall. The Asus has a slightly more accurate grayscale and colour temperature, but the gamma was too low in the lighter grey shades compared with the KTC, which tracked the 2.2 gamma more closely. Colour accuracy was very similar in the default modes, with the Asus being slightly more accurate for wide gamut content and the DCI-P3 colour space. Both screens also feature an sRGB emulation mode, which can be really useful when viewing SDR content. The gamma on the KTC model is actually configured to an sRGB gamma curve instead of 2.2, but follows that sRGB curve quite well, apart from in lighter grey shades where it is too bright. That results in some loss of detail in brighter greys. The Asus tracks the 2.2 gamma curve instead in darker tones, but does drop too low in the lightest shades, again causing a loss of detail. The main difference really in the sRGB modes between the two screens is that the Asus has a more accurately configured colour temperature and white point, being only 3% too cool for whites, but having a very good overall grayscale accuracy with a delta E of 1.2 measured. You also get a good clamping of the smaller colour space on the Asus screen, although there does remain a bit of over coverage resulting in a 108.1% sRGB relative coverage measurement. Colour accuracy for sRGB and SDR content is now very good, with a colour delta E of 1.1 average. You still get, importantly, full access to all the screen settings including brightness, and that's great news, allowing you to adjust the brightness and also things like the colour balance and RGB channels if you want to. On the other hand, the KTC has a slightly too warm white point by 8%, and the grayscale accuracy is not quite as good with a delta E of 2.5 measured. The clamping of the colour gamut back to sRGB is a bit more accurate here though, with 97.1 coverage going a little too far in red shades. The colour accuracy is again good overall with Delta E 1.7 average measured, but not quite as good as on the Asus. One drawback of the KTC model is that you lose access to some of the settings, most notably the colour channels in this sRGB emulation mode, so it's not as flexible as the Asus model. Overall, the Asus has the slight edge in its default wide gamut mode and its sRGB emulation mode when it comes to its setup. It's a bit more flexible, and as we said earlier, it also importantly supports that uniform brightness mode. One final significant consideration is of course the price point. The KTC G27P6 has a more attractive price point at around $800 at the time of this video, whereas the Asus screen still retails for around $1,000. I'll leave links to check out the latest pricing and availability in the description below for both, but that's a 20% saving at the time of this video, so obviously not to be ignored. There's nothing really to separate the two for gaming usage, which is a primary use case for these screens of course, with the same response times, motion clarity and lag performance. The Asus does have a more gamer design if that's what you're after, although on the other hand maybe you want something more modest like the KTC design. Overall, we think that the KTC model has the edge when it comes to HDR content, with a more accurate setup, better shadow detail and an overall brighter experience due to the way the ABL is configured. If HDR gaming or movies is one of your key uses, then the KTC offers a better performance for that. On the other hand, the Asus is better for general desktop and office applications thanks to its slightly better default setup, its slightly more flexible sRGB mode, but most importantly because of its added uniform brightness mode. That's really the one key thing that the KTC model is missing. So if you're going to be using the screen for a lot of general and office applications, then the Asus will be more suited from a performance point of view. The KTC model does, however, offer some nice additional features like USB-C, KVM functionality and even some modest speakers. So if any of those will be useful to you, then it provides even better value for money. We'll provide links to our full written reviews for both screens and other useful content in the description below. Do let us know in the comments which screen you're interested in or if you've got any questions at all. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on other monitor related content, news and reviews. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.